Dr. Lee and I both firmly believe that there is a finite risk of sudden death with the taser, whether it be directly related to the taser or related to the increased adrenaline state that occurs after being tasered. So these are obviously not toys to be played with, and they have a lethal risk. And that's, I think, the most important message.
Should there be a license requirement for owning tasers? I mean, I got my taser down on Telegraph. We're like less than $100, no questions asked. And this is a potentially lethal weapon.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
To regulate it?
We regulate guns to some degree just because of its potential for danger. We regulate cars similarly because of the potential for harm to you, to others. And I think the taser has that potential to harm. That's what we're talking about here, and it makes sense that it ought to be regulated. It might make sense to regulate it like a gun.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems is that nobody's regulating the taser. The first question is, who's going to regulate the taser? If you look back at the history of the taser, originally the darts were ejected with gunpowder. Therefore, they came under the purview of the ATF. When that happened, and they were subject to questions by the ATF and regulations, they quickly changed the ejection mechanism to being compressed air and compressed nitrogen. Now it's no longer considered a weapon. Now it's no longer in the purview of the ATF. So nobody regulates the taser weapon, and nobody challenges their actual claims that they put on the website, or any of their safety claims that they pass on to police. So police are the only source of information for using tasers is the taser company itself for these weapons. And so one of the most important things is we need to have somebody, an independent body, regulating tasers first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. So have any politicians, any lawmakers taken any interest in your work?
I personally have been asked by the Canadian government to be an expert witness in their inquiry into the Vancouver taser death, Vancouver airport taser
That
death.
was the guy who didn't speak English, right?
Right. And Canadians have had a much different reaction, partly because of that very highly publicized incident, to the use of tasers. There's an outcry up there. To the point that they appointed a retired Supreme Court Justice named Thomas Braidwood to lead a commission looking into the use of tasers, looking into their claims, looking into physiologic effects of the taser, and directly looking at the circumstances of this unfortunate man's death.
Yeah, that was terrible. Like I said, look into all these videos. It really gets depressing. I really appreciate you guys putting all the work you did and sticking your necks out to do this. Another question. Many of the videos I've seen, they do more than one shot, even if the person's rolling around on the ground screaming. Despite the fact that is egregious, against their civil rights, how much does the chance of injury increase with each tase?
Well, you might say it's like playing Russian roulette. Each taser application has potential for triggering a lethal arrhythmia. Every time you taser somebody, it's like taking another chance with their lives. It could be that multiple tasers applications or stacked applications could kind of exponentially increase your level of adrenaline in your system, and that we know increases your risk of arrhythmias. So I think that there is potential for multiple applications for that being exponentially dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, I have
A question?
Yeah, so this is a study by Jeffrey Ho, which is a taser, you probably know this one, taser funded study. It's basically their conclusion was, in this resting adult population, meaning they were testing it against adults at rest, but the Taser X26 did not affect the recordable cardiac electrical activity within a 24-hour period, following a standard 5-second application of the taser.
Can I see that article real quick?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
remember this one, but I just want to make sure it's the one that I recall.
So, my question would be, of course, that if it's a 5-second application of the taser, and we're talking about multi-burst taser usage here, what do you have to say about that?
One of the real flaws in that study is that the taser was used in the back in all of these police volunteers. Secondly, the taser is going to overwhelm any electrical signal from an EKG. So the risk is at the time of tasering. So if you have an EKG and you do an EKG before and after, you still can't conclude that the taser didn't directly capture the heart because you didn't measure the EKG at the time of the tasering. So those are two very important flaws in this study.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the type of studies, though, that are basically being put out on the internet, of course, in Taser's defense. And this other thing that I found was this Dr. Hugh Calkins, right, saying that if you look at the Taser device in particular, it's been about 10 years since it was first introduced, and in those 10 years, it's been subject to intense and critical scrutiny by every law enforcement body that adopts it. He said, if this were really causing people to die, if it were not having a favorable impact, mind you, it wouldn't be so highly adopted, okay? And then I read Calkins, who serves on the medical advisory board of Taser International, ... And I'm going, okay, that's already a conflict of interest there. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, he's been a hearty advocate for the Taser, and but when you find out that he is on the payroll of the Taser, you certainly have to think twice about where he's coming from. I think that the fact that that he suggests that we can rely on law enforcement agencies to judge the safety of the device is ludicrous. I mean, we're talking about a few events, per year, probably in each county, and it's just very hard for individual police departments to judge, rates when you're talking about such few numbers of events. You really need data collated from, several states or large states like California to really understand what's really going on. So I think his argument is weak at best, and clearly his motivations are suspect.
He, if I'm not mistaken, made those comments before our study was published, and so his opinions may have changed since our study is published, and we have independently found that there is an increased risk of these events.
Okay. Pull your mic back. It's in the way.
Have you guys found a racial slant at all to the victims of Taser death?
We didn't look at that issue, so I can't comment.
Okay, so you guys must have had a lot of contact with law enforcement. What was your experience learning about procedure, the kind of training officers receive? Did you get a glimpse into the guys behind the tasers, the guys who are being attacked for the use of tasers?
Well, we sent out surveys to the law enforcement, and in general, they were very helpful, and they were also very interested in whether or not the taser that they were using was harmful at all. What was interesting was that sometimes our research was blocked, not so much by the police officers, but by the lawyers of the cities, people who are protecting the city's interests, protecting them from litigation. They were the ones that sometimes blocked our ability to get data from the different cities and jurisdictions.
I echo his comments, and I would say that in general we found a lot of the police agencies to be very helpful, and they themselves were curious. Hey, are these weapons increasing risk for sudden death? So a lot of the agencies willingly gave us information. As we talked earlier, the 10 largest cities, none of them gave us data, and because of city attorneys sending us a form letter that they're exempt from our survey.
But they are making records and keeping records of the effect of tasers, or do you think they're just not even looking at it as a problem?
It's a good question. If they're being responsible, they should be. And if they're being responsible, they should release that data to independent investigators to really ask that question.
But you bring up a good point there. I think that there is no mandate for police departments or sheriff departments or law enforcement agencies to maintain this type of data. And I think that there's enough question about the safety of the taser that it ought to be required. We need to know, how safe or how unsafe this device is if we're going to be giving it to so many law enforcement officers.
Were you already doing your research when the Oscar Grant incident happened?
Yes.
How did you feel, knowing what you knew about tasers and seeing, the news say, well, you know, the guy didn't mean to take out a gun, he meant to taser a guy who was handcuffed in the back. What was your impression from that?
Sure. So that is an interesting subtext to our research, which is we looked at events of these sudden deaths before and after tasers were introduced. We didn't actually look at individual incidents in which tasers were introduced. We simply found that these rates of death increased after tasers were introduced. So a critic of our study might say, hey, you didn't actually look at these events. It might have just been coincidence that these rates increased. We counter that each year that the taser was introduced is a different year for each city. So unless every city happened to have a coincidental increase in sudden deaths the year of taser introduction, then that's not a plausible explanation. Another explanation is, we look at every single cumulative effect that the taser might bring to an agency that introduces the taser. So in other words, if you have an increase in deaths related to a shooting, but that shooting was related to the fact that somebody thought they were pulling their taser rather than their gun, then that could be an explanation for how these deaths might increase, even though it might have not been directly related to a taser, if you understand what I'm saying. So that's a mechanism by which introduction of the taser might increase mortality, yet not be directly related to a taser.
But when you heard the idea that he mistaked the taser for the gun, you've probably held, these tasers in your research. Does that seem plausible? Does it have the right weight?
Well, it's hard for us to speculate
It's
exactly
a hard
what
question,
goes through somebody's mind when they have been in a struggle with, somebody who they're trying to arrest or subdue. It certainly does seem plausible to me that in the heat of the moment you might grab, a taser or a firearm, thinking it was the other, weapon. So it seems plausible to me. I'll add this that relates to our research, that we also saw a slight bump in the number of firearm-related deaths at the same year that the taser-related, or the non-lethal force deaths occurred, which was the year that the taser was introduced. So it could be that the taser, being on the belts of these police officers, it could be that sometimes they're pulling the wrong,
Or the
device.
fact that it's shaped like a gun, even.
Shaped like a gun. Maybe it escalates some encounters to the level that lethal force needs to be used. It's hard to know exactly what's occurring.
Is there a safety on a taser, on these cop tasers?
That's a good question.
I don't know,
I
actually.
think there it is, but I'm not sure.
Because this cop who did this, he had a gun with the safety off already. So he was just walking around with his gun with the safety off.
Yeah.
And tasers, you don't have a safety, so you wouldn't check. That's just what I'm trying to
Yeah, I'm not sure.
think.
I don't want to speculate because I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, flat out question. If you could ban tasers, would you? On a personal level. If you could just say, hey, you know what, we don't need it, we'll find other ways. If you were, say the president of the United States.
That's a very good question. I think our goal here wasn't necessarily to tell police departments or cities, how they should equip their law enforcement officers. I think it was mainly to elucidate what's really going on here and to let people know that there's potential danger here. That said, I think there still may be a role for a taser. Like we talked about earlier, getting tasered is a lot safer than getting shot. And so it may make sense that the officers have a taser at their disposal, but they just need to know how to use it, to be prudent about it, to use the least amount of tasering necessary to get the job done, and to be aware that the taser could cause a lethal arrhythmia or could cause this excited delirium type of sudden death, and to be ready to respond to it when they see it.
So you're not anti-taser. You want people to know there's a risk.
That's right.
I think we both, we're not social scientists or law enforcement, but as physicians and researchers, our goal is to educate the public and educate police on the lethal risk of these weapons. And if they're used responsibly with knowledge of these risks, you know, it's really not our role to answer that question, but we both agree that they should be more regulated.
I find the most powerful thing about your research is that this should be a beginning spot for what we start doing. In fact, I think you even call out at the end, right, that you say we need to do more research, we need more funding to do more data collection and so forth. The law enforcement potential to use a taser in a proper method, I think, is far outweighs that of all the problems that we've seen so far, and your research may help law enforcement divisions to really take a serious look at what they're doing. You have guys like different departments from Spokane to these other departments. What was it? The Columbia Police Department are basically saying they're looking at Taser's research and they're going, even Taser said themselves, right, that you need to aim lower with your Taser.
Exactly.
Now, I don't know what prompted Taser to do that. Was it your research?
We think in part,
You know?
our research has
It came
contributed
out,
to that.
yeah, I mean, it came out October 28th, right?
Prior to that release, Taser had adamantly refused to acknowledge any cardiac risk and refused to issue any warning about tasering areas in the body. And so we believe that's a very important first responsible step in terms of acknowledging this potentially lethal
Yeah,
risk.
and then these police departments, like you said, the only resource that they have for Taser training, for instance, is like these salespeople from Taser International. I think that a part of this research, we need to get these independent bodies, people who are licensed to teach Taser or licensed to teach police departments about Tasers, somebody other than Taser International. Taser International is like Smith & Wesson. I mean, they're selling weapons of aggression. And that's all fine and dandy. I mean, we're all for the Second Amendment and so forth. But once you have a salesperson trying to teach law enforcement officers how to, quote, use the weapon, they're not really their primary goal, right? Their primary goal is to sell weapons, not to train.
I think I don't necessarily have a problem with them being the ones to teach them how to use the weapon, but I have a problem with the company themselves deciding how much risk a taser has and how much risk there is in the use of a taser and how to use a taser. That should be a question for an independent body.
And widespread control over that data.
Yeah. You know, as you mentioned, we would have loved to get more data from, have gotten more data from more cities. Just the more transparency that is needed is the very important issue that we highlight at the end of our article.
Have you guys seen any of the research, or did you come across any power surge issues with the tasers? I've seen that there's been studies done that it's actually not such a controlled voltage and it can jump up quite high.
You remind me of an independent research project that I believe the CBC did, where, again, Taser themselves are the only source of information in terms of outputs, in terms of voltage, in terms of current. And so their claims were tested by an independent body, I think it was the CBC, where they took a sample of these tasers and they found that a good number of them, I believe it was a third of them, actually outputted higher voltage and higher current than Taser claimed. And so that's yet another example of an independent body being needed to regulate the Taser.
This guy is lying to police officers, and I'm going to make sure that a copy of your critique goes to those police officers in Palo Alto. And let me just stop it there. He's extrapolating in-custody death with mental illness and tasers. What does being mentally ill have to do with dying from a taser shot?
Well, I guess he's making the argument that the taser isn't causing the sudden death, that it was some predisposition of these victims
Like
because
they were
of their
more
mental.
prone to excited delirium?
Yeah, I think that's his presumption. One of the things I will point out is that I was just reading this little introduction to the clip here, and it says, you know, the police chief in Palo Alto wanted tasers. The city council appointed a task force to advise the council, and they never ask for independent researchers. They always ask for people that are financed by Taser. We have never been asked by any law enforcement agency to independently give our present our research findings or to give a unbiased opinion on the effects of the Taser. I've been asked by the Canadian government to do so, but not by any police agency that's considering the Taser.
And you know of no police agency going to any kind of doctor at all when they?
Well, he's a doctor, but he's one of the highest paid Taser consultants.
And is he a cardiologist as well?
He's not. He's an emergency physician. So he has been asking questions that are out of his specialty area.
A question we have from a nurse is actually, where did it go? What is the procedure of the EPS that you perform in the hospital, and why do you perform it? I guess in regard to somebody who's been tasered. You know, what do you do if somebody comes in the emergency room and they've been tasered?
Depends what their condition is when they get to us. You know, if they are in a potentially lethal arrhythmia like ventricular tachycardia or ventricular fibrillation, these are arrhythmias that are usually treated by an external shock. And that's how we would treat somebody who came to us like that.
So you treat them like they got hit by lightning?
Well,
I guess that's a lot stronger.
They went into a potentially lethal arrhythmia, and you know, if we can shock them immediately, that typically allows us to save them.
You shock them again to bring them back?
We shock them with a high voltage resetting type of shock that resets their heart and kicks them out of the lethal arrhythmia and back into a normal rhythm.
And what's the success rate of that?
Extremely high if you get to them in time.
Yeah.
And about how long do they have?
Yeah, you got about 5 minutes to have a 50% chance of saving them. 10 minutes after they go into the lethal arrhythmia, you probably got about 5 to 10% chance of saving them.
One of our recommendations has always been that if a police agency is carrying the Taser, they should carry the antidote, which is an automatic external defibrillator. They're on the order of the same cost as a Taser. And there's no reason why, if you have the Taser and you cause a sudden death, causing a sudden arrhythmia, you can't have the recognition that happened, and B, save them immediately with an AED. So we're advocating that, sure, if you want to carry the Taser, you should also carry an AED in the trunk of your police car so that you can save somebody if you cause a sudden death.
Sounds right. The nurse also asked, have you ever been able to induce excited delirium or similar phenomenon in patients in the EPS? What does EPS stand for?
It's probably the laboratory that we work in. That's the procedure room that we do our procedures. You know, electrophysiologists do the procedures in a very sophisticated environment where there's a lot of test equipment, and that's probably what she is referring to. Excited deliriums, you know, is a syndrome that occurs when, you know, people are at high anxiety states, often fearing for their lives. And it's extremely hard to reproduce that. It'd probably be unethical to reproduce that in a test situation. So, you know, I don't think anybody has, you know, done it in a systematic, experimental way. And that's part of the problem with a lot of the things that we're talking about here regarding Taser, is that you can't do, you know, research on humans that can reproduce the exact situation that we're talking about. When somebody is being subdued by police officers, they're fearing for their lives, they have a high adrenaline state, and then tasering them at that moment could be, you know, a different situation than tasering a police officer who's getting his, you know, training on the Taser, who's relaxed and otherwise healthy. It may be totally different situations, and saying one is exactly like the other is like saying an apple's like an orange. So you know, it muddles the, you know, what we have to work with when we talk about, you know, the safety of the Taser. But, you know, we have to, you know, be honest about extrapolating what we do have, which is some animal data, some experimental data, some meager human data and using that to try to figure out whether it's safe and reasonable to use or not.
I mean, is it truly a rational excuse, though, to say that, well, it wasn't the electrical current going through his body, it was the fact that he was really, really scared? Because you can't just run up to somebody and go, bang, 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 and, you can't scare the crap out of somebody until they die.
Mm-hmm.
These people would not have died if they hadn't been shocked, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can they get away with saying that?
That's the reason why we asked the questions we did, which is we knew that these events were happening before the tasers were introduced. That's why we looked at these event rates 5 years before tasers were introduced, and we used that as the baseline for comparison. Then we showed that when the tasers were introduced, the first year after that, there was a 6-fold increase in these kinds of deaths. The recognition that they were occurring before, and that excuse being proffered by Taser that these are just these excited delirium deaths, we directly tested that question, and we found that they did, in fact, relate to a large increase in these sudden deaths.
Well, it's hard to, be in, to not notice that there were several sudden deaths related to the taser in the news the past several years. And, as scientists, whenever you read something that's eye-opening like that, you wonder, what the mechanism is, and is it truly what you think is going on is really going on. And I'll be honest with you, I actually did not think that we were going to find that the taser was increasing the sudden deaths. I actually thought that this was a red herring, that this is something happening before taser, and the taser is now introduced, and it's still happening, but now people are connecting the two. And it was a little bit of a surprise to me to see the spike in sudden deaths when the taser was introduced. So that's how we got involved. We were a little surprised by the findings, and now we are kind of trying to let people know that maybe the taser isn't as safe as we originally thought.
I got into taser research based on initial comments I made in the media about a particular case in the Bay Area 4.5 years ago. And I basically mentioned that the taser current itself could cause a sudden death. And I got a lot of media attention, and some of it from Taser International directly. They contacted me directly to reconsider my statements, to fly to Phoenix and meet with their chairman, to offer me money to fund my research. And I ended up declining all of their offers. And in my opinion, as scientists, one of the most important currencies we have is independence and being unbiased. And so we both were very adamant about not receiving any kind of funding from any agencies in our research. So our research is purely independent. So as Dr. Lee said, we both set out to really answer this question. No real-world studies had been done. Everything that had been done before were on animals or on police volunteers in controlled situations. So nobody had actually looked at these real-world outcomes. And so we set out to craft a study where we looked at the question directly of whether or not introducing the taser would have an impact on these sudden deaths.
Awesome. My last question, I guess, would be, as a woman who has owned a taser for about 2 years now, never had to use it. I'm as afraid of any girl of, my independence leading me to get hurt. I don't want to carry it around if I could kill somebody with it. And this isn't a cop taser. This isn't some diesel industrial taser. Could I kill somebody, even if it's just a small chance? Could any woman out there right now holding their pretty little pink taser, could they kill somebody with it?
I think the answer to that is yes. I think that our data, other animal data, suggests that getting a taser can indeed put you into a lethal arrhythmia and cause death. So, if you don't want to put anybody at risk at all for sudden death, then you probably ought not to use the taser.
Yeah. That having been said, the risk is very small, exceedingly small. There has to be the perfect storm of factors for a taser to cause a sudden death, but there is that risk. But you know, in recognition of that, somebody could have an allergic reaction to mace and die suddenly. So you know, it's about risk-benefit ratio, and as we've mentioned before, being tasered is much preferable to being shot, and it's a personal decision. As long as somebody's aware that there is that lethal risk, that it could cause sudden death, then that will lead to more responsible use of the taser.
So ladies, you can keep your pink tasers, just be careful how you use them.
I think that would be an important message.
That would be my message.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Okay.
It's been really
Sure.
enlightening.
Thank
you
you.
so much for your time.
Our pleasure.